All right. Let's jump into some code. And we are going to make and with this, we're going to establish a connection to MongoDB with the Nextjs application via mongoose. And inside of VS Code, let's go ahead and create a Nextjs app. Next app at latest space then dot. And we'll be using the recommended default settings. I know there has been a lot going on with Nextjs here as of late, so we'll make sure that we are up to date on the appropriate version and we have all of the right dependencies going so we don't cause any concerns with our app. We'll give it just a moment here to finish installing. All right, let's head to the browser and let's pull up the Nextjs docs. The latest version, there's been a security update. This has been all over the internet. So if you have a Nextjs app that's deployed, make sure you have the appropriate versions as recommended in the documentation. And we use the @latest command, so we should be good to go. But I just want to make sure for those that may be following along. All right, we should be good to go.
It's good.
All right, let's confirm the project. Package.json. And we have Next 16.0.10 and React 19.2.1. So we should be good from a security perspective. Let's remove this spoiler. Save. And remove the boiler out of the global.css. And we'll set the body, HTML, the root, .app. Set the height to 100%, the width to 100%, overflow X to auto, no hidden. I think I'll set the text size to add apply, text small, perfect. All right, let's start this to make sure it is working. We'll run npm run dev, and it's starting on localhost 3000. Let's check it out now. Okay, we have the homepage text on screen, so we are up and going with the latest version of a Next.js app. Now Let's connect this thing to MongoDB. Perfect. So in the next few minutes, what I want to do is set up a connection between this Nextjs application and the MongoDB database. I enjoy this stack because it offers a lot of flexibility and ease of integration, especially when you don't know exactly how your application may evolve. MongoDB is kind of one of those go-to backend resources that really has a lot of flexibility without so much code, if you will. So in the next few minutes, what we'll do is we'll set up the latest version of this Next.js project to MongoDB cluster, and we'll be using Mongoose to query and mutate the data. So the first version we've already cared for by installing the latest version of a Next.js application, which is version 16.0.2. And we chose the default settings for the app, which includes TypeScript, the app router, the turbo pack, Tailwind CSS. Now what we want to do is go ahead and log into our MongoDB account, which it is free to sign up. Once you're logged in, you'll be redirected to your organization's most recent project overview. If you go up top and click on project, then view all projects, from the all project window, we have the ability to create a new project. Feel free to name this project whatever you like. I'm just going to name it Quick CRUD for demonstration purposes. Once you click next, we'll keep the default permissions. If you wanted to give someone else ownership access to your project, this is where you'll include their information to send out an invitation. But once you have everything satisfied, click create project. Next, you'll be redirected to that project's overview window where you have the ability to create a cluster. For the project demonstrations, the free tier will be appropriate. Feel free to customize this based upon your project needs. I'm not going to worry about renaming this cluster. We'll keep the default name, and we won't include any preloaded sample data, but you do have that option should you want to just go ahead and preload your database with some dummy or some seeded data. AWS will remain the provider, and we'll be sure to select the region that is closest to us. From there, we'll click create deployment. So from the connect to cluster pop-up model, then we'll have a pop-up model that represents the connect to cluster setup. From here, we're going to keep the default username and password. And then we'll click create database user. This is important because this is the username and password that'll be included in the connection string that'll be stored within the Next.js application inside of an environment variable that's going to give us access to this cluster from the application. So you want to make sure that you have that information and you store it in your application safely. And you are also ignoring the .env file as you push your information to Git. But once you clicked on create database user, go ahead and click choose a connection method. And we're going to select drivers, and then we'll be prompt to install MongoDB. So go ahead and click this. Go ahead and click copy to copy this command. We'll head back to VS Code. And we'll install MongoDB. And since we're using Mongoose to query, I'm going to install it now by typing the command npm I mongoose. Going back to the connect a cluster, we'll then need to copy, heading back to MongoDB, we'll then need to copy the connection string that we want to store within our environment variables. So I'm just going to click copy, head back to the terminal, head back to VS Code. In the root of the project, add a file named .env. As I mentioned, this connection string is extremely important because this is what's going to give us access to our individual cluster. So you want to make sure you're storing it in your environment variable file. And this file is also included in the .getignore. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure it's included now. We'll then want to store this connection string in a variable that will be used in a function within our project to establish that connection to MongoDB. So I'm just going to store this connection string in a variable named mongodb underscore URI. And we'll paste in that string, and then we'll close that out. And just so you can see it, here's the connection string, the .env file. And inside of the .getignore, we included .env. Heading back to our connection cluster, that is all we need to do to establish that connection between Nextjs and MongoDB. In the root of the project, we need to establish a function that we can use throughout the app that's going to establish that connection between Nextjs and MongoDB. So in a directory named lib, I'm going to add a file named db.ts. And I'm going to paste in this function where we basically import Mongoose. We use paste in a function inside of this db.ts file. And I'm not going to waste your time going through every line by line what exactly this function is doing. Just know that it is using Mongoose to establish a connection to MongoDB using the environment variable name that we store within .env. If there's a connection established, it's going to reuse it. If it is not one established, it'll establish one. This is also going to give us access to the different methods that come from Mongoose that allow us to create and query and mutate the data within our database. So just to make sure I don't have any typos, I'm going to copy this mongodb underscore URI variable. In the env file, I'm just going to paste it in to make sure I don't have any typos, close it out. And although MongoDB does, so I think next we'll then need to organize our data that we want to send to the database and have a reference point as we want to query and mutate the data within the application. So in the root directory, we're going to create a file name. In the root directory, inside of the lib folder, in the root of the project, inside of the lib folder, let's create a file that will store the models that's going to help us organize the data within our database. I'm just going to call it note model.ts. We'll begin by importing mongoose. And this is going to come from mongoose. We'll begin by importing mongoose, and we'll also want to get access to the document, the schema, and types. The first type we're going to establish will be the database type. This will be an export interface column. And instead of naming this column, I'm going to name this note. The first type that we're establishing is the note. The first type that we're establishing is the database type. And for this, we're only going to establish a title, which will be a string. Then we'll need a front end type that we will reference. This will be an export interface note. And with that, we'll need to establish the ID as a string, the title as a string. And that's what we'll be using to access on our front end. Finally, we'll establish the model schema. Finally, we'll establish the note schema. That note will have a title, which will be a type of string. And it will be required. So we'll set that to true. Then we'll export it to gain access to it throughout the app. And basically what this is saying is that if the note exists, we're going to go ahead and access it. And if it does not exist, then we want to establish that note model. To test out this connection, I'm going to go ahead and add a document inside of our MongoDB cluster just to confirm that we have the model established and we're able to add something to the database. We refresh the window, click on cluster, browse collections. All right, we're going to stop, then restart the server. Okay, so we should have had our connection to MongoDB at this point, but we don't see the tables listed here. So let's do this. I'm going to add a quick action to TS. And we're going to import db connect, create an export default function, get notes. And we'll go await db connect. Const notes is equal to await note. Grabbing that model, yep. And we'll go to find. Make this an asynchronous function. And then we will just return notes json dot parse json dot stringify notes. So let's test this out. Let's bring this inside of the home page, import get notes from @/lib. We already have the async there. And we'll just go const notes is equal to get notes. Notes.map. Dot underscore ID. I think we call this a title. Yep, title. So in order to confirm our connection to MongoDB, what I done was just created a quick function that will reach out to what I done was, if I could talk this evening. So to confirm our connection to MongoDB, inside of a separate directory, I created a file named action.ts, brought in the DB connection to establish the connection to MongoDB, and imported the note model from the /note-model file. Created an asynchronous function named getNotes. Inside of it, established the connection to MongoDB, created a const named notes, awaited that connection, used the note model to find the notes within the database. And if we have any notes, we just want to return those as parse data, to stringify it because it is an object, and we want to make sure that we can serialize it and display it onto our home page. Inside of the page.tsx, I imported this function that we just created, made sure that the page.tsx file is now asynchronous, called that function inside of a const named notes, and then mapped over to display the notes within the database. So now if we go back to our MongoDB cluster, We click on Browse Collections. We see that the model now exists within the table inside of our database. To confirm that to confirm that we do have the connection, let's go ahead and add the title field to this note. And what should happen is it should be displayed on screen inside of our local host. So let's test it out. So we're getting this message that it's not a function. Let's go back to this. And we'll destructure that. And I see we're getting this error. Let's make this any. And let's check out this local host. Huh. Still getting the error message here. Oh, see what I did? That should be awaited. Now let's check it. But I thought I seen. And as you can see on screen, it is now pulling the ID of the note that is within the database. Let me make sure. So the adjustment that we made was just making sure that we await this connection to MongoDB. And we now have the ability to query our data from the database, and we've established that connection between the Nextjs application and MongoDB. And just to do a quick recap, what we done was this: set up, installed the latest version of the Nextjs application, installed Mongoose and MongoDB as dependencies throughout the app, logged into the MongoDB cluster, set up a connection string with the username and password, grabbed that connection string, stored it inside of a variable named .env, stored it inside of our .env file inside of a variable, used that variable name inside of the lib function, where we basically imported Mongoose, utilized that environment variable to establish that connection with the username and password, created a quick function to say, hey, if we don't have a connection to MongoDB using Mongoose, let's go ahead and establish one. If we already have a connection, let's reuse it so we're not wasting resources. Exported this function in a variable named db.connect. Then we established a file named action.ts where we stored the server action. We begin by importing the environment. We begin by importing the connection function that established the connection to MongoDB. Then we also brought in the note model to help organize the data. Inside of an asynchronous function named getNotes, we began by creating that connection to the database. And inside of it, awaited that connection, utilized the note model to find the notes within the connection, within the data, to utilize a, let me repeat that. So we then awaited the connection, utilized the note model to find the connections within the storage, and stored those notes within a const named court inside of a const named notes, returned the notes, parsed the data so that we could return it back to the browser, serialized, and we're able to display it on screen. And then inside of the page.tsx file, we imported that get notes function, made this homepage function asynchronous. Inside of it, we awaited the connection using the get notes function that we created. And then we mapped through the notes array and displayed the note title and the note ID to show that we do or that we are able to get the data from the database. Now, to really test this out, let's try creating a note on the front end and making sure that we can display it on the front end. And it also, more importantly, is stored within our MongoDB cluster. So to keep things consistent, I'll just go back to the action.ts file and we'll create this function now. Export default function, create note. Node dot create. So within this action file, we created the next server action to create a note. And this is a asynchronous function named create note that will take in form data. It will first establish the connection to MongoDB, capture the title inside of a const named title using the .get method, making sure that it's a string and that we're not getting any empty white space. A simple validation stating that if there's no title, we're going to throw a note or error back to the user saying invalid note. Then await that connection and use the note model and the .create method from mongoose to utilize the title to create a note. And then after it's done, we're just going to revalidate the path to make sure that we are getting the most up-to-date data from the server. Now let's use this function inside of our page.tsx. Now back into page.tsx, began by importing that create note function and then adding a form with the action of create note being passed to it so that once we submit this form, that action will get ignited and we'll have the ability to create a note provided that all of the parameters are met. I appreciate it, my friend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Exit. Oh. Inside of the form, we just created the input with the ID of title, a name of title, and a placeholder of title that matches the .get that it's looking for from the form data. So I'm just going to save this file and go back to localhost. And it appears that we forgot to use the use server directive so that we can call this action as a server function. So I'll just go back to VS Code. Inside of the action.ts file, at the very top of it, we'll just add the use server directive. Now we'll go back to the page and refresh it. We see we still have the ID of the initial title along with the form that has the title input and the create note button. So we'll just type live title, click create, and notice that we now have the title in addition to the ID. And just to confirm that it actually did take, let's check our database. If we update the data, we see that we have two notes within the database. The first one being the initial one that we created, the second one being the second one being the note with the title of live note. Yeah, it worked. Sweet. That's funny. Too funny. All right. I think I'm going to probably have to shut it down there. We may come back later on and add a few more features to it.